Interview Archbishop Andronik, Kotliaroff of Syracuse and St. Nicholas on the reasons for the break with Metropolitan Agafangel, Pashkovskiy, lies in the Church, Cyprianism, and his canonical status. Interview Archbishop Andronik, Kotliaroff of Syracuse and St. Nicholas on the reasons for the break with Metropolitan Agafangel, Pashkovskiy, lies in the Church, Cyprianism, and his canonical status. Portal-credo.ru. Why did you break off communion with the first hierarch of ROCANA, Metropolitan Agafangel, and the bishops who support him? Archbishop Andronik. The canonical basis for this break was discussed at our 6th All-Diaspora Council in January 2017. One of the fundamental reasons is the deceit and dishonesty upon which Met Agafangel is attempting to build church life. This is a modern version of Cyprianism in which attempts are made to subordinate Christianity to anti-Christian principles. If one bases church life on deceit, then the same thing that happened to the Old Testament church in the time of the Lord Jesus Christ will happen to today's Church of Christ. The Lord Jesus Christ, in fact, turned to the high priests and scribes of the Old Testament church with his terrible condemnation. You belong to your father, the devil, and you willingly carry out your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in truth because there is no truth in him. When he tells a lie, he speaks in character because he is a liar and the father of lies. John 8:44. And in the 20th century, what happened to the Old Testament church happened to the Moscow Patriarchate. Metropolitan Sergei Stragorodsky, called the new martyrs political criminals, turned the church over to the administration of anti-Christian authorities and in return received personal prosperity. We do not want the same thing to happen to our small but faithful remnant of the Russian church abroad. Portal-credo.ru. Could you provide specific examples of actions of Met Agafangel that you consider lies that are destroying the church? Archbishop Andronik. As a result of the actions of Met Agafangel in my diocese alone, which had consisted of 12 parishes, only 6 parishes remain. Those that departed were frightened by Met Agafangel's decree denying the sacraments, even on one's deathbed, to those who do not agree with his actions. A few years ago, he issued such a decree against the nun Sinia and 2 other nuns who simply moved from a monastery near Odessa to a monastery in the St. Petersburg diocese. In another case, Met Agafangel, directly from the pulpit during the liturgy, began to threaten our congregation with hellfire if they did not donate towards the purchase of the synodal house in the New York area. It should be said that our parishioners always donated not inconsiderable sums of money to the church and personally to Met Agafangel. But at some point, his desire to squeeze everything out of our parishioners in America took on completely indecent forms. As a result, he has been left with nothing, and no one in the US and Canada followed him, with the exception of 2 parishes, one in Washington, D.C. and another in Pennsylvania. I want to offer 2 examples of lies that are unacceptable in the church. We have a large parish, the Holy Trinity Church in the New York neighborhood of Astoria. When its esteemed longtime rector, Far Vsevolod Dutiko, died, Met Agafangel began a real battle for this church. At the request of the parish council, I ordained to the priesthood Father Dmitry Dobronravov, who had served as deacon with Far Vsevolod and who was well known to the parishioners. But Met Agafangel appointed as rector Far Vladimir Petrenko, who lives in Brazil. The parishioners were unable to pay for his move and, in general, to financially support 2 priests. At the same time, just half an hour from Astoria, proto-priest Gregory Kotliaroff serves and lives. If one needed an experienced priest to tutor Fester Dmitri, why not invite Fiasta Gregory? The Astoria Parish Council permitted for Vsevolod's widow, Irina Dutikau, to live in the parish house completely free of charge for 1 year and only at the cost of utilities for a 2nd year. Met Agafangel, however, for some reason, accused the council of cruelty, and that they were supposedly attempting to kick out the Matushka. This was the conflict that led to the separation of the Astoria Church from Met Agafangel. I can offer another more recent example. In the beginning of September, I visited the Romanian monastery of St. Minis, where I communed at the liturgy with Far Barnabas, who is under the Romanian Old Calendar, Bishop Sofroni. The next day, I went to the monastery of Bishop Sofroni, where I met Bishop Anfim of Moldova, who has remained with Met Agafangel. He invited me to rejoin Met Agafangel, but I replied, "That train has already left the station." At one time, the Greek Metropolitan Demetrius also tried to reconcile us with Met Agafangel, proposing that Met Agafangel offer us autonomy within the framework of the ROCANA. But Met Agafangel, for some reason, did not want this and forced a schism, imposing his personal will in all matters and not taking into account neither reality nor the desire of the parishes. Soon after my meeting in Romania with Bishop Anfim, there appeared on Met Agafangel's Internet Sobor website a false account attributing to me the words that we and Met Agafangel have different gods. In the comments section of this article, Met Agafangel immediately inflated this and accused me of heresy and blasphemy. But I never said these words at all, and I do not think that Met Agafangel and we revere different gods. Portal-credo.ru. But this is all, so to speak, the moral side of the matter. Did you have any canonical or even theological reasons for separating from Met Agafangel? Archbishop Andronik. Of course. Although we recognized Met Agafangel as the first hierarch of our church, each bishop within his own diocese possesses the fullness of canonical authority. The first hierarch has no right to interfere in the dioceses of other bishops or to remove the prohibitions of clergymen forbidden from serving by their bishops. Our first hierarch is not the Pope of Rome. Met Agafangel encroached into the St. Petersburg diocese of Archbishop Sophrony, and without the consent of the diocesan bishop, took under his omophorion the parish in the village of Dudachkino and lifted the prohibition from serving from the priest Alexander Sukhov. Met Agafangel usurped the authority of the synod by making decisions without our consent. For example, on his own authority he accepted Bishop Anastasi Surjik from ROCOR-A. Then, when asked at the Council of Bishops why he did this, Met Agafangel answered, "Well, Bishop Anastasi was passing by and I did not want to miss him." And this contradicts the 34th apostolic canon, which forbids the first hierarch from deciding anything without the participation of the other bishops in a church. The synod, which is in Met Agafangel's pocket at his behest as chairman, began to impose reprimands on bishops. But according to church canons, it is not right to simply judge a bishop in this fashion. This is in fact a complicated procedure. For example, when we met with the Greek Metropolitan Demetrius last year, Met Agafangel on his own authority cancelled the decision of the synod, stripping me of my diocesan see, and restored my rights as a ruling bishop, again without a decision by the synod. When I refused to accept this decree without confirmation from his synod, he immediately issued a new decree returning matters to their earlier state, that is, that I was again stripped of my diocesan see. He wants to manage the bishops as if they were parish priests, whom he can appoint and dismiss when and however he wants. The actions of Met Agafangel are permeated with an unchurchly spirit, an ignorance of the canons and of the traditions of orthodoxy, and this turned our church into a laughingstock in front of the other ROCA fragments and the entire Orthodox world. At this point, it is appropriate to also speak about the theological reasons for the separation. Unfortunately, Met Agafangel has a superficial grasp of orthodoxy. He was not raised in the Orthodox faith, he does not have a theological education, and he is not sufficiently well read. He was hastily consecrated a bishop in Suzdal in 1994 when an independent church authority was being established in Russia. According to the canons and given Met Agafangel's past life, he perhaps should not have become a bishop at all. He has subsequently preached teachings that are far from orthodoxy. For example, he personally told me during one meal that Jews who did not accept Christ would be saved because they are God's chosen people. In one of his articles in the Vestnik Tosi, 1994, number 2, p. 30, Met Agafangel preached bizarre teaching that Catholics, Old Believers, Monophysites, and some Protestants have 6 of the 7 sacraments, lacking only the sacrament of the Eucharist. In an interview with Portal-credo.ru in 2010, Met Agafangel argued that the controversial theses of the Greek Met Cyprian Kutsumbas were sound, orthodox ecclesiastical doctrine. Portal-credo.ru. By the way, as you have already mentioned, Met Cyprian's theses, known in some quarters as the heresy of Cyprianism. Why do you not consider them to be heresy? Archbishop Andronik. The reason is because Met Cyprian himself published these theses only as a personal opinion, as issues for discussion. He did not insist that they be required for the church. We did not share this personal opinion of Met Cyprian. His Synod of Resistance perhaps sympathized with Met Cyprian's views, but they never proclaimed them as a confession of their faith. After the death of Met Cyprian, as you know, the full complement of his synod entered into the true Orthodox Church of Greece, the Chrysostomites as they are called, whose orthodoxy is beyond doubt. Thus, we believe that with the death of Met Cyprian, Cyprianism has ceased to exist in the Greek Church. In addition, we believe that the anathema against ecumenism, proclaimed by the Church abroad in 1983, is fully sufficient to condemn the doctrine that the Orthodox Church combines heretics and Orthodox. Why condemn this as some kind of new heresy? But if Met Agafangel proclaims Cyprianism as an orthodox dogma, then this is a sign of serious spiritual error. Met. Agafangel has now tried to accuse us in some sort of schismo-ecumenism, by which he claims that we recognize the different ROCA fragments and seek to unite with them. But it was Met, Agafangel himself, after all, who appealed to the same fragments with the proposal to join in Eucharistic communion on an equal footing without joining his synod. Our consideration of this issue is in the spirit of the famous Decree number 362 of St. Patriarch Tikhon. As a result of the persecution of our church, an administrative center has been liquidated. A local council cannot be called. The Holy Patriarch, the Holy Synod, and the Supreme Church Authority have not been elected. This means that all of our synods, church districts, and all other associations of bishops are only temporary, created for the benefit of the church under different historical and geographical imperatives. None of the structures has the right to subordinate the others to itself and to declare itself the sole Supreme Church Authority. At the 6th All-Diaspora Council, we stated that any fragment of the Russian Church, if it professes an intact Orthodox faith and whose hierarchy has apostolic succession, can enter into Eucharistic communion with us without subordinating itself and preserving its internal structure as it has historically developed. In America, Bishop Stefan Sabelnik responded to our proposal and joined us in Eucharistic communion, but he is not administratively subordinate to us. For Met Agafangel, who wants to lord over those entrusted to you. 1 Peter 5:3. Our apostolic freedom seems to be schismo-ecumenism. Several years ago, Met Agafangel consecrated Bishop Roman for ministry in Israel on the territory of the Jerusalem Patriarchate. It was done allegedly with the consent of the imprisoned Patriarch Irenaeus, who had hardly considered this matter. Subsequently, Irenaeus subordinated himself to the new Patriarch of Jerusalem, Theophilus, and so now, what is the status of Bishop Roman, who remains in Met Agafangel's synod, has met. Agafangel now encroached on the territory of another local church. I served for 25 years in the Russian ecclesiastical mission in Jerusalem, and I well know the rules and customs that have arisen there. Even in the times of the Russian Empire, there has never been a Russian bishop in the Holy Land. We observed the status quo and recognized the Jerusalem Patriarchate. As a result, the chiefs of our mission held the rank of archimandrite and not of bishop. Even the future first hierarch of the ROCOR, Met Anastasi, when he lived in the Holy Land, was a retired bishop, not a ruling one. Met Agafangel also wrote a denunciation to the Kazakh authorities, requesting that they rescind the registration of a parish in Kazakhstan belonging to Bishop Iriny after he left the Odessa Synod. This is reminiscent of what the Soviet Met Sergei Stragorovsky did in his day. Another violation by Met Agafangel was the consecration of a bishop in Australia. We have one parish in Australia near Melbourne, and I was temporarily in charge of the diocese. A conflict arose between the parish and the rector, Father John Smelik, who then abandoned the parish and ceased performing religious services. I had to send Father Nikita Grigoriev from America to assist the parish, yet, despite the protests of the parishioners, Matai Agafangel consecrated this John to the episcopate, and his entire diocese consists of one nun. That Met Agafangel ordained priests without serving the liturgy and tonsured married priests in order to consecrate them to the episcopate was spoken of many times at council meetings. At the Council of Bishops meeting in 2015, Met Agafangel adopted a very strange resolution that contradicted the canons. He assigned to himself the management of all U.S. parishes during his visits to the United States. He usually spends only 2 weeks a year in the United States, and the remainder of the time the full authority for administering these parishes, as stated in the resolution, belongs to me. If controversial issues arise, they must be resolved by Met Agafangel alone. Thus, in effect, he appointed 2 bishops for the same see, which is strictly prohibited by church canons. The 8th canon of the Third Ecumenical Council seems to warn Met Agafangel. Or the vanities of worldly honor be brought in under pretext of sacred office, or we lose, without knowing it, little by little the liberty which our Lord Jesus Christ, the deliverer of all men, hath given us by his own blood. Portal-credo.ru. How can one canonically define your separation from Agafangel? Is this a division within one jurisdiction, or did you create another ROCA fragment? Archbishop Andronik. We have withdrawn from administrative and canonical subordination to the Synod in Odessa and have registered in America under the ROCA name. We do not have anything in common with Met Agafangel. We are now in the organizational stage of creating independent church districts. With God's help, we have established the Diaspora District, and a Russian district is being organized. My role in all of this is modest. I am not the first hierarch, but only the chairman of the Council of Bishops of the Diaspora District. Interviewed by Alexander Soldatov. No matter what your intentions may be, you are causing a schism. A schism was perpetrated a while back in 2014 by Agafangel. Due to the unfair punishments at that time, 2 bishops, Dionysi and Irony, and several priests with their flocks stopped commemorating the Metropolitan. It must be noted that they announced that they are not splitting off from the church, but are compelled to adopt self-administration. The same situation has now repeated itself, with B. Andronik and B. Sophroni being punished. In this way, the Metropolitan is cutting off one part of the church after another. Why is this happening? Agafangel is imposing his will on the church, which inevitably results in the church members resisting. This resistance does not arise from some lust for power or disobedience. Piety is preserved in the church by its members, and any attempts at violating the spiritual freedom of the church will be rejected. This is a healthy reaction of the church body. Truly, it is incorrect to call what is happening to us a schism. Usually, when a schism occurs, the church administration tries to do everything possible to stop those stepping back from leaving. With Agafangel is doing just the opposite. He is pushing out the dissenters to be rid of them. To what end is Agafangel meting out punishments of bishops, priests, and lay people to cast them out of the church. For example, when he censured all 3 priests in Izhevsk, what did he want? But for them to leave. The Metropolitan always follows the same simple scenario. He levels unfair punishments on the dissenting priests, which they cannot obey. For example, how could the Izhevsk priests leave their flock without church services? Then when the punished do not submit, he announces that they have gone into schism. What hypocrisy! Just as Agafangel has made the Synod his obedient device, is exactly how he wants to co-opt the whole church for himself, by ridding himself of those who do not obey him and promote his followers. Therefore, this is not a schism, but an endless cleansing of the church from undesirable elements perpetrated by the Metropolitan to transform it into a subservient flock. Questions and answers. How should one call such divisions within the fragments? An answer grounded in the canons cannot be given to such a question, simply because these very fragments, that is, microscopic church jurisdictions existing autonomously, are not provided for in the canons. This should not be forgotten by those who enjoy discoursing loudly about the canons and applying them to our circumstances. The canons present a universal church made up of united local churches, along with various divided groups of schismatics, who are outcasts from the church. In our day, just the opposite is true. What we consider the universal church is made up of divided fragments, which do not associate with each other. Further divisions within the fragments can be called divisions of the church administration. If we break with the Odessa Synod, we will lose contact with the family of anti-ecumenical churches. These are very unfortunate circumstances, though it does not follow at all that we will fall away from the church because of this division. To confirm that, let us consider, for example, the Synod of Archbishop Tikhon, Pashkovskiy, who is not in communion with the Canonical Synod. Let us ask ourselves, why? Is the Synod of Archbishop Tikhon less orthodox than the Odessa Synod? Certainly not. It can be explained by developments in the relations between the bishops of both synods, a topic best avoided at this time. For the fact that the Odessa Synod, out of all the other fragments, is in communion with the Canonical Synod is no more than a historical coincidence, and conclusions of a canonical nature cannot be derived from this circumstance. One must remember that the Greek true Orthodox churches are in a similar fragmented condition. For example, the bishops of the Synod in Resistance would most probably not agree with the contention that before they joined with the Canonical Synod, they were outside of the church, and their mysteries were invalid. What is the reason for convening the 6th All-Diaspora Council? To restore the canonical and conciliar order of our church that has been violated by Metropolitan Agafangel. On what grounds can a council convened by 2 dioceses of the ROCA be called an All-Diaspora Council? To begin with, this title is a tribute to tradition. Councils in the church abroad included clergy and lay people from all over the diaspora, and thus were called All-Diaspora. They were convened for a specific purpose and at special times in history. In all of the history of the ROCA, there were only 4 such councils before 2007. The 5th All-Diaspora Council already did not include all those who opposed the decision of Laurus's Synod to join with the Moscow Patriarchate. Agafangel was chosen as the primate by this council. Since our council is being convened with the aim partly to evaluate the actions of Agafangel, then it is only fitting to name it the 6th All-Diaspora Council. The pre-council committee recognizes that the name of this council does not accurately describe its standing, but the name does adequately describe the intent of its organizers. We consider the task of restoring the entirety of the church to be the duty of all the fragments. They are all invited to the council. The topics which will be included in the Council's agenda affect all the parts of the Church abroad. We understand fully that our plan evokes mixed feelings among many of the fragments. There is doubt and distrust and stereotypes formed over the decades, and even a desire not to ruin the established balance. That is why the forthcoming council is for us but a first step on the way to a common resolution of administrative and theological questions. The interest that representatives of other jurisdictions are expressing in our council shows that they acknowledge our genuine desire for the union of all the parts of the Russian Orthodox Church abroad, scattered throughout the world. What are the canonical violations made by Metropolitan Agafangel? In accordance with the Holy Canons, the Metropolitan as a bishop is considered the first among equal bishops. He is granted full authority only within the confines of his diocese. In our case, Metropolitan Agafangel, as a result of the fact that the majority of bishops are his loyalists, has established a personal dictatorship in the Church. For all appearances, our Church has a council and synod of bishops, but in reality, all issues are decided by the Metropolitan. This is an unacceptable violation of the conciliarity, sobornost, of the Church. Metropolitan Agafangel has seized sole authority and uses this power to the detriment of the Church. Without the benefit of a trial and often in absentia, the Metropolitan has imposed canonical sanctions on bishops, clergy, and laity, whom he finds objectionable. For example, in Nichevsk in 2014, all 3 parish priests were indefinitely banned, and their substantial flock were thus left without church services. This year, at the July meeting of the Synod, Archbishops Andronik and Sophrony, in absentia and having committed no offense, were sentenced and deprived of their bishoprics. Why we did not agree to Met. Agafangel's proposal to hold the All-Diaspora Council in Odessa. The charge has often been heard that we, the Pre-Conciliar Committee, convened the All-Diaspora Council in defiance of the canons, and after refusing, met Agafangel's proposal to hold the All-Diaspora Council under his chairmanship. In answering this charge, it must be noted that the unrest caused in the Church by the canonical violations of Met. Agafangel himself are the primary reasons the All-Diaspora Council was convened. In such circumstances, how could Met? Agafangel chair a council that was called to review his very own violations. Not only does this not make sense in respect to the canons, but to logic itself. Holding the All-Diaspora Council in Odessa would have become yet another costly spectacle paid for by church funds. The status of the ROCA stipulates that a metropolitan is judged by the Council of Bishops. However, as stated in the resolution of the 6th All-Diaspora Council, the current membership of the Council of Bishops has shown itself incapable of resisting the dictatorship of Met, Agafangel, and restoring sobornost, conciliarity, in the Church. The members of the Council of Bishops were willing or passive accomplices in the Metropolitan's canonical violations and share in the responsibility for them. The latest shameful action by the Council of Bishops was that they unanimously signed a resolution that accused ABP, Andronik, and ABP, Sophrony, and their clergy of engaging in the heresy of schismo-ecumenism. Accusations of heresy are very serious, as heretics alienate themselves from God and the Church. By accusing their brothers in Christ of heresy without any reason, only to curry favor with the Metropolitan, the Council of Bishops in Odessa, in our opinion, finally lost all spiritual authority. It is quite cynical to accuse us of heresy when Agafangel himself has consistently expressed the same views for which he now calls us heretics for espousing. It is interesting that he himself has been accused of heresy for such views. This was said of him in 2011 in the newsletter of the Southern Russian Diocese of ROCOR-A, soberrussia.ukos.ru. I feel truly sorry for those who trust him, Met Agafangel. I also feel truly sorry for those who believe his heretical idea that all the parts of the ROCA that fell away from it are still parts of it, which he is trying to unite under one group. Is this not the ecumenical branch theory, simply in another form? Therefore, to avoid being tempted by the heretical ideas of Vilas Agafangel, it is necessary again and again to remind those who still have not recognized him. Beware of wolves in sheep's clothing. Speech by Far V. Rojnov. Perhaps this is where charging us of schismo-ecumenism arises from. Thank God all of this is behind us. The All-Diaspora Council has cleared the road for a conciliar, canonical life in the Church, free from falsehoods, intrigues, and hypocrisy. What is an All-Diaspora Council? We consider it imperative to convene the All-Diaspora Council in order to evaluate the actions of Metropolitan Agafangel and his synod, and to take steps to restore conciliarity, in accordance with the regulations of the ROCOR. In the case of special need, the first hierarch, together with the Synod of Bishops, convenes an all-diaspora church council, consisting of bishops and representatives of the clergy and the laity. However, in the current situation, as the council is being convened to put the Metropolitan and his synod on trial, they should not participate in preparations for the All-Diaspora Council. Can the All-Diaspora Council have judicial functions? Oh, in accordance with the regulations of the ROCA, the Metropolitan is subject to trial by the Council of Bishops, chaired by the eldest hierarch. Moreover, it is required that the number of bishops accusing the Metropolitan consist of no less than 1/3 of the membership of Council of Bishops. In the case of the latter, it is unclear from where this requirement is derived. It is not based on the holy canons, but in fact contradicts the canons. For example, but if any bishop or clergyman has a dispute with the Metropolitan of the same province, let him apply either to the exarch of the diocese or to the throne of the imperial capital, Constantinople, and let it be tried before him. Fourth Ecumenical Council, 9th Rule. In other words, only one bishop or cleric is needed to demand the trial of a Metropolitan before a higher court. It must be said that we find ourselves in extraordinary circumstances. There are no canonical directives to guide our actions in such a situation. It is obvious that the ROCA Council of Bishops, the majority of whom are the Metropolitan supporters, cannot deliver an objective decision on the canonical violations of Metropolitan Agafangel. According to the regulations on administration of the Russian Church, in the Russian Orthodox Church, the highest authority, legislative, administrative, judicial, and executive, belongs to the All-Russia Council, which will be convened periodically at specified intervals and consist of bishops, clergy, and laity. The Patriarch, together with church administrative bodies, are accountable to the All-Russia Council. The All-Russia Council, composed of bishops, clergy, and laity, is equivalent in the ROCA to the All-Diaspora Council, which will also include clergy and laity. The decisions of the All-Russia Council, as well as the All-Diaspora Council, go into effect after they are confirmed by the Bishops' Conference. Taking all of the above into account, it is clear that the All-Diaspora Council has the right to judge the case of Metropolitan Agafangel, and that its verdict will then be confirmed by the Bishops' Conference, which will consist of bishops not involved in the canonical violations of the Synod. Metropolitan Agafangel was elected at an All-Diaspora Council, and now an All-Diaspora Council has the right to call the Metropolitan to account for his actions. What are the responsibilities of the Pre-Council Commission? At a meeting of the Diocesan Council of the Diocese of Syracuse and Canada, it was decided that preparations for an All-Diaspora Council should begin, and a Pre-Council Committee to include bishops, priests, and laity was elected. The Pre-Council Committee will determine the exact date and place of the Council and will develop an agenda that will include the following key issues: an assessment of the actions of Agafangel and his synod, an examination of the unjust punishments imposed by Agafangel and his synod against the archpastors, pastors, and lay people of our church, an invitation to all parts of the Russian Orthodox Church abroad to begin a dialogue to resolve any misunderstandings and divisions with the goal of a possible uniting in Eucharistic communion of all the faithful members of the Church, the restoration of the canonical conciliar order of the Church, the establishment of a church court. If the Metropolitan Agafangel does not preach heresy, you do not have the right to separate yourself from him. The 14th canon of the Second Council of Constantinople states, "If any bishop, on the basis of charges against his own metropolitan, shall secede or apostatize from him before a conciliar verdict has been issued, and shall abstain from communion with him, and fail to mention his name, in accordance with established custom, in the course of the liturgical celebration of the Eucharistic mystery, the Holy Council has decreed that he shall be deposed from office." This rule thus prohibits bishops from ceasing to commemorate a metropolitan accused of any sin before he is adjudged by a council. Also, the subsequent 15th rule, however, provides us with the single exception: when he publicly preaches heresy. In this case, subordinate clerics are required to break communion with the heretic. For some reason, this rule is usually misinterpreted in the sense that, if a bishop is not a heretic, all of his actions must be tolerated. It is as if adherence to orthodoxy provides immunity to commit all manner of lawlessness. What is overlooked is that this rule requires that he be commemorated not indefinitely, but only until a conciliar examination, that is, until a trial. According to church canons, the accused, irrespective of the high rank he may hold, must submit to the court. The canons also require that this court not be delayed for a lengthy period of time. Accusations against Agafangel have been made many times, but with the support of the majority of bishops, he has eluded trial. This is the reason why the All-Diaspora Council is a necessity. Until the All-Diaspora Council is convened ABP, Andronik continues to commemorate the name of the Metropolitan during the liturgy. It should be noted that in ancient times there have been instances in which a priest broke communion with his bishop for reasons other than dogmatic heresy. For example, Saint Theodore the Studita broke communion with patriarchs Nikephoros and Tarasios, not because of a dogmatic heresy, but because of the fact that they were in communion with the priest Joseph, who performed the adulterous marriage of the Emperor Constantine. Those who assert that the presence of heresy is the only reason for separating from a bishop have apparently forgotten about phenomenon such as Syracuse. Syracuse is not a dogmatic heresy, but it is worse than any heresy, because while seeming to adhere to dogmas and canons, it destroys the very essence of Christianity. In earlier times, the devil fought the church through dogmatic heresies. Today, his tactics are different. Modern people are not interested in dogmas, and thus dogmatic heresies do not attract anyone. The great temptation of our time is a false church that appears completely canonical and orthodox, but is in fact alien to the spirit of Christ. Where lies, hypocrisy, lack of mercy, and self-interest reign, there cannot be Christ.